Welcome to our second edition of Musical Musings with Kurt Nikkanen and Julien Benichou. Kurt, good to see you.
Great to be here again.
So today I wanted to focus on the concertmaster aspect of your career. As we discussed last time, you had a distinguished career as a soloist, and you still currently have a distinguished career as a soloist and as a teacher. But a big part of your work this day is being concertmaster of the New York City Ballet when you're not guest concertmaster with other ensembles such as the Singapore Symphony or the MidAtlantic Symphony. But most of your time is with that New York City Ballet Orchestra. And I want to know how it's been to be a soloist, starting to play in orchestra so much, and how you've developed your leadership and orchestra playing skills.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I had, before I took the ballet job, I had absolutely zero concertmaster experience, okay? Not in school orchestra. Well, that's not exactly true. When I was 12 years old in youth symphony, I was the concertmaster of our youth symphony, New York Youth Symphony. But I really didn't think to myself, well, geez, you know, that's a career path that I would like to shoot for. I really didn't play in an organized way from the concertmaster chair until I took the New York City Ballet job. So that's a gap of, let's see, age 12 to age 35. So about 25 years of non-concertmaster activities, which is kind of rare. Usually you go, if you're setting out on an orchestral path, you have many years of playing in symphony orchestras and you get to know the repertoire and you have the luxury of all that time to familiarize yourself with the core orchestral literature. And the other thing that was difficult coming into the ballet job was it's not really the core orchestral repertoire, it's a very specific ballet-centric repertoire. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. First of all, there were a couple of times I went to play as soloist here and there, where the conductor would say, you know, Kurt, I don't know if you'd be willing, but I'm one violin short in the first violins or second violins. Would you be willing after your concerto? Julien, you were not the first to do this.
Ah, okay, great.
Would you be willing after your concerto to go sit in the back of the section and play pictures at an exhibition with us? Or Firebird or some piece like that I'd never seen before? And I always considered myself to be a good side reader. So I would do it and it would be good experience, but I didn't realize how hard it would be. That was the other thing. I had a much easier time playing the concerto, Tchaikovsky or whatever, on the first half than I did. It was a little bit scary sitting there because you're so far away from the conductor. So I started to appreciate what orchestral musicians go through, you know, that you really have to be aware of so much more in a sense and anticipate so much more than when you play from the front or you're leading in a string quartet or you're in any other situation. It's not that easy. So that was sort of my trial by fire, again, playing orchestral music. And maybe that gave me a little bit of appreciation when I came to the ballet and I sat in the concertmaster chair the first time. I had really very, very little awareness of what, in totality, what that job entailed. Really, all I could think is, well, it means that the guy sitting there has to play well. He has to know the music thoroughly and so on. But it was a real learning curve. When I started the job, I had no idea how it would go and how it was sort of an experiment. I almost saw it as a project of undefined length that I was taking on. And it kind of grew out of an interest that I'd had for the 5 years or so prior to my taking the ballet job, which was I was putting together recital programs with a dance theme. And the aim was going to be, you know, it was violin and piano, dance-oriented compositions of various styles. And then I was starting to think, well, maybe I should invite a choreographer to collaborate and make sort of something larger out of it. So that's sort of, and then when the ballet job became a reality, it was sort of like an invitation to do this project that I had envisioned on a much larger scale. That's sort of how I saw it initially. in addition to, well, it has health insurance. You know, so when I started the job, there was a little bit of that element. The thing I didn't really reckon on was the fact that there was going to be so much adjustment going on, because when you play concerts in a symphony, it's very simple. You follow the conductor, or you listen to what's going on around you and you adapt. There's no element of staging. There's nothing more complicated than that. But here, you know, all of a sudden you're told, well, on Tuesday night you played like this, whereas on Thursday night you're going to play it completely differently with different tempos because it's different cast. So it was much more an exercise of flexibility. And so it wasn't like taking a traditional symphony concertmaster job where you're just responsible for the bowings, although there's that element too. I'd never had to worry about standardized bowings in my life. And in fact, that I have to say was difficult for me initially, because I was very freeform myself when it came to bowings. I changed them every time I played a piece. I almost never wrote anything down. I changed my mind, you know, a dozen times before I would present something, but that doesn't work in the, as you know, in the orchestral world. The section is uncomfortable if you operate that way. And in fact, the first few years, my section would yell at me, when are we going to get the bowings? Or, you seem to be changing your bowings willfully every time we rehearse this. And so I had to get it through my head that, in all fairness, they needed something they could rely on that was not a soloist bowing, but a section bowing that was repeatable and made them do their best playing. So I learned a lot about bowings and those sorts of things in the first few years, and what makes a section function well. I'm still learning about that stuff.
Right. What was the learning curve like in terms of body language? Obviously, a soloist has to do some leading, but it's kind of a different kind of leading.
That's true, but I think it's a different sort of body language from the chair. It's more akin to a string quartet body language, where you try to feel the other 4 string principals and you move. I remember you saying something, I think it was about cello playing at one point, where a good cellist will shift his body weight from one side to the other and not just sit in the back of the chair. You know, that they're always leaning to one butt cheek or the other, right? And that it pays to be a little bit off center. Didn't you told me that once? It's absolutely true. And feeling comfortable doing that. Initially, if you're taught traditionally, you're much too upright and concerned with good position to lead physically, in a physically communicative way. So in a way, you have to get more comfortable with the idea of moving in a way that people behind you and to the side of you can read. You're not just thinking about, you know, when you play chamber music, yeah, they have to see your scroll sometimes to give a cue, but here you're really trying to not everybody can see the conductor well at all times, not everybody can see you well at all times, but they can feel your intention if you also have a good amount of lateral movement. So for that reason, after the first couple of seasons, the conductor decided to put me on the inside, which was obviously not traditional, because sitting on the outside, there were 2 problems. Number one, I was playing into a wall, and the sound goes into the wall of the pit. Number 2, none of the players in this region, and when I first came to the job, the configuration was different. We had firsts and seconds next to each other. And later we changed that to a stereo format with the seconds directly opposite me. So then the principal second also had to move to the inside, so I had good contact with her. And the viola's over here, and the principal cello, Fred, would be over here. And so we would have a nice little quartet formation, and that made all the difference. Then we could breathe together and move together more naturally, because otherwise it's just, you're not really able to effectively lead at all.
I heard you talk in rehearsal about a couple of points. One of them was that you like lateral motions with the violins better than vertical motions. When
lateral and rotational motion.
And you find that they are more effective than
I used to be much more still when I would play. And that works if you're playing by yourself and it's safe. But, you know, I mean, most soloists who grow up, you know, watching Heifetz or somebody like that. I mean, very erect posture, very regal, not too much movement, laterally or otherwise. But this kind of playing requires more lateral movement and more rotation. So your lower back better be in shape because you'll be twisting around to a good degree so that the people behind you can kind of get the message and you can pull them with you a little bit. I'm not talking about extreme, I don't believe in extreme movement, just a little bit, just enough. And you learn to be more efficient with it. But I think initially you almost have to exaggerate it just to get yourself in the right frame of mind, that they need a bit of visual help in addition, because they can't hear your sound. It's different if everybody can feel and hear each other's sound, like in a string quartet or in a chamber group, it's possible. But in this case, it's really not. So it's sort of, it's got to be that you anticipate the conductor's intention, you read it, and then you show it to those around you so that they also respond a little bit earlier. Otherwise, there's sort of a domino effect, and the impulse is later and later the further away from it you get.
And you say, when you say initially you have to exaggerate the motions, you mean initially while you're training as a concertmaster or at the beginning of the course?
I think in both senses. Initially, when you're training as a concertmaster, you have to force yourself to move more than you otherwise would, right? And maybe early on in the rehearsal process. Once everybody gets the message, then you don't have to do it. You don't have to keep hammering them over the head. Then they'll kind of think, why is that guy still, thrashing around? But just in order to get it together so that everybody has, you have to establish a degree of trust.
Great. So
however you can. And I'm sure it's that way with conducting too. At first, you got to spell it out with a stick, and then after everybody gets comfortable, you can hint at it.
Yeah, exactly. Or if something is repeated several times, you show it clearer the first time, and then once the orchestra gets it, you leave them alone.
And if all else fails, just shouting out 1 or 2 or something like that, and I'm just kidding, but
yeah, I know.
It's been known to happen.
it has happened before. Great. So when you are guest concertmaster somewhere, how do you sort of weave yourself into the fabric of the pre-existing sound of that orchestra? Is it more?
Well, I mean, you listen, you try to feel a little bit what they need, maybe. Like if it's a case where they have a good blended sound, but rhythm is a problem, then you show them a little bit more rhythmic impulse. Depends what your focus is. If the rhythm is good, but the sound isn't very generous, you might overplay a bit in the beginning and try to get everybody's volume up a little bit, play a little broader. But you get that within the first couple of rehearsals, what kind of band it's going to be, and whether they listen or everybody's kind of locked in their own world, just waiting for, very often they're waiting for instruction, or they want some kind of, they're not going to do anything unless the conductor shows it.
Yeah, so that's, no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's it.
So I've noticed when working with you as a concertmaster or as a soloist, that your emotional involvement into the music and the way you're able to, bring that out of others around you helps the sound gel and blend better, so that everybody feels that energy and is able to play their heart out.
Well, I think that works a bit better than focusing strictly on togetherness. Yeah, because once you pull them along emotionally and so on, give them a reason to put the beat here or there, and they feel it that way, they're not going to question it anymore. If they have to think about it intellectually, then it's always risking not being together. Everybody has to kind of breathe the same and feel it the same. Then they don't really need my help so much anymore, and everybody can just play.
And how do you go at finding that right emotion in a particular spot for a piece? Let's say you feel like you have some emotion, but you want to refine it. You want it to be more appropriate for the piece, or you want it just to bring the orchestra back.
Intensify a little bit it's like getting into the character of the scene. If you're an actor, you kind of have to think about the music in those terms and say, okay, what is first of all, what's the composer's vision as you see it? And what aspects of that does this particular conductor, you, for example, what does he seem to be trying to emphasize? And then you intensify those aspects. So it's, it's a question of priorities. Let's say the music is very intense, but it's also very soft. That's one of the most difficult things to get at, is a soft dynamic within the section that has presence and intensity. Because usually when players in orchestra play softly, they turn off the vibrato to some degree, and it just sounds kind of flat. But to keep the sound alive, and I think a lot of it also has to do with feeling the rhythmic flow of the music and generating the motivation for the phrase and the direction for the phrase from there, rather than having the entire section waiting for a beat and trying to play with the beat, that everybody's sort of feeling the direction themselves. And then, so that they're not following anymore.
I see what you mean.
That's hard to do in 1 or 2 rehearsals, I guess. But when you watch orchestras like Berlin, you see very much that's what they're doing. And that's why, sometimes I've heard it said that the early rehearsals of those orchestras are confusing for outsiders to watch, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of cut and dried, like, ensemble work. It must be together here, and that surprises people. Because I think they use their early rehearsals, especially on a new piece, to feel out the character of what's happening. They haven't made those decisions until they're in the moment, and then they feel, okay, it has to go in this direction, or it has to go in that direction. And the leaders kind of nudge it along in that direction, but giving everybody the responsibility to interpret. It's a different aesthetic, I think, than the way most American orchestras.
I see what you mean. They're looking for, how's the wave going to be, and then actually surf it at the concert.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. One of the instructions that I've seen you give is to sort of fill in the conductor's beat if the tempo is very slow, for example, where if the conductor is like 1, 2, 3.
I think that's very hard when there's a lot of space and you have a lot of room between beats. It's hard to feel that. So that means everybody has to, and I stress this in teaching a lot as well. Everybody's responsible for their own internal subdivision. And without internal subdivision, and it doesn't have to be a regular subdivision, it can be there's an ebb and flow to it depending on what the other instruments are doing during the long notes, but that everybody has to feel where the long notes are going and not just go by the stick for it.
Fantastic, yeah. So that there is a back and forth between the conductor and the orchestra in terms of counting, in terms of feeling where the phrase is going.
Right.
My conducting teacher would say that you come to the orchestra with a feeling for the piece, a feel for the piece, and then they respond with their feel for the piece, and you absorb that, and then it becomes a back and forth with, and really so what you're describing is the leadership job of starting the wave and then let everybody join in.
Right.
Great.
And not having too much of a preconceived idea of how it's going to go. That's, and it's hard to imagine that, I guess, when you practice your part in isolation. But I don't know, maybe some of the practice for that could be, people should practice the part, and now we've got wonderful representations of performances of the great pieces online, and play along with Berlin or something, put headphones on and see what it feels like to ride their wave and put it in context. And because, I mean, it's following in a sense, but it's also anticipating. And that's why I think it's so hard to play well from the back of a section. It takes so much concentration because you have to be more aware of what's happening up there to ride the wave effectively and not be late to what's happening.
Great. What recommendation would you have for, let's say, a young violinist who's in conservatory now and says, I want to be a concertmaster? And
well, yeah, I mean, I think it's great if you have that aspiration I mean, sometimes I think to myself, well, what would have happened if I had made that decision in school, let's say, and really concentrated, as well as my solo literature, on learning all the concertmaster solos at that time. I mean, the great thing is now they've got like many wonderful programs that focus on that literature. As far as I know, there isn't one specifically for ballet, but I'd like to change that maybe, you know, start doing some classes in the ballet literature and the concertmaster solos of the ballet literature.
I think that
would be good. And then the only other thing I would say is just, I think it's important to play as much chamber music as possible. And I mean, most of the great concertmasters are also excellent quartet players for that reason. And they're used to playing in that role where it's leading, but it's not a rigid kind of leading. You know, it's less like the military and more organic somehow. But I think that's becoming the ideal now, that a concertmaster has to be like a jack of all trades, like a little bit good at everything, including the personal managing of the feelings of the players, because it's not easy either.
Sure, there's interpersonal stuff to manage.
It's a big part of it too, like, you know, creating good feeling in your section.
Do you, so we know you'll be back with the MidAtlantic Symphony as a soloist in next April, and we look forward to that. And will you be opening at the ballet? Do we know?
We don't know anything yet. Somebody else asked me that today, and I don't know. The New York Philharmonic just canceled their fall season. The Met is not doing anything, at least through the end of the year. So I'd be very surprised if we come back to at least a full fall season. Maybe we'll do some fundraisers and some small forces things with social distancing. You know, there's been some talk about taking out the first 2 rows of seats, creating a little extra distance, putting up shields, that kind of thing, and just seeing how it goes. Obviously, it's not going to go back to normal immediately, but I hope we can go back to presenting some things in September.
Fantastic. So is there anything else you want to discuss about your concertmaster role here in this chat today?
Well, just specifically as the concertmaster role regarding
regarding your life as a concertmaster in general.
Oh, just in general.
Yeah, we talked about last time that this concertmaster's job at the New York City Ballet is kind of unique because you get to play so many concertos. And
well, it is unique, and it's a real plus. I mean, it's a bonus, and that was a major selling point, you know, for me, because that literature, the 20th century concerto literature, is my favorite. I wish they would add a few pieces to it.
Berg and Barber and Stravinsky.
But we can play so many great things. But even apart from that, it's really rewarding, and you learn about music. You appreciate it when you then go to play as a soloist. You're much more aware and hopefully helpful to the violin section that's backing you up, and you appreciate your concertmaster in those situations and what they're capable of doing. Because I mean, really, it's something that we take for granted, but it can make or break the performance, having a good concertmaster. So I really learned to love it since I started. I mean, I've been doing that job at the ballet for 18 years now, and plus my association with your orchestra and some others. So it's been it's a great learning experience, and I must say, you know, if you're a young player who is thinking about a career in music, and you're a violinist and you love the orchestral literature, it's certainly a path you should consider.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to talk about all this with you today, Kurt.
Great, Julien.
We'll be back together shortly, I think in a couple of weeks. And
See you then.
Yeah, you have a great day.
Okay, you too. Talk soon.
Talk soon.